As I said, that the words to that song were written by our special guest today, Reverend George Clark, and we're glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
You know, holiness preachers aren't born, they're made. Babies aren't born holiness preachers. They get that way through a long process of events. And so I want to go back for a time now. In fact, this particular program or interview may even last 2 weeks. But we don't want to rush anything. We don't want to leave anything out. But I know that there are a lot of people in this town and in surrounding areas who are interested in finding out just how it is that the Pioneer Tract Society came about, that your ministry came about. Suppose you start us off by telling us what part of the state you're from and a little bit about your family background.
Well, I'm mostly from Kinston, North Carolina. That's where I went through high school and then on into the ministry.
Well, were you born in Kinston?
No, I was born down at a little place called Lowland, North Carolina, down on the island on the coast. Stayed down there till I was 12 years old and came up to Kinston and stayed until I was grown.
Well, you told me that your father died at a young age and left you and your family.
Yes, my father died down there. He was a doctor, and he died down at a place called Lowland. And when I was 12 years old, that was about 6 years after that, my mother married again, and we moved to Kinston, North Carolina, where we all stayed until I was grown.
Is that where you first felt a call from God? Or?
That's where I was. I was in Kinston, a young fella. In fact, I was about 24 years old when I felt the call of God to get out of sin and get right with God. I submitted to that and soon went into seminary and was soon schooled as a Baptist minister.
Well, was it hard for you to come to God? I mean, having a father that was a doctor and a mother that was an outstanding lady in the community, were you sort of let's say a clean-cut fella, or just what was your spiritual condition?
I'm afraid people had me estimated better than what I was, because I did a little bit of everything wrong. Drank some, cursed some, and gambled some, and did most anything the ordinary boy will do.
Well, when God called you, you got
all that left.
All that left.
Yeah, all that left. I had no more desire for that. And
well, tell me the specific time that God spoke to you, and you decided that maybe you better go to the seminary or turn to God.
Oh, well, I was 17 when I first started, and I joined a meeting house, church, some of you call it. And then I went back in sin and went in service and went in the Air Force and stayed a while and came back. And I got tired of sin, but I couldn't feel the call. I couldn't feel any call, any move. To one Sunday, I was alone. I was studying art, and I was painting the Lord's picture. And when I painted the picture, it spoke to me. And when it spoke to me, I yielded. Right.
The picture spoke to you?
It spoke to me on the inwardly man, and I was thinking to myself, I drew you well. And it spoke to me.
What was the picture you draw?
It was a picture of the Lord, and then it seemed to speak to me inwardly and told me it could draw me as well as I could draw it.
How about that? I imagine it sort of shook you up, didn't it?
I got ready right straight to go to the seminary.
What'd your mother think about that decision?
Anything so I would change and wouldn't be wild anymore.
Uh-huh. Well, I imagine it was a relief to her for you to turn to God. But when you got to the seminary, what did you find there?
Well, I didn't find what I was looking for. I wasn't satisfied. I'd hear them tell about different ones being converted. They didn't use the word saved much in those days. The Baptists didn't use the word converted, and I didn't know where I was converted. I kept giving up one thing at a time when I started under conviction, so I didn't know exactly where it happened. And I stayed on there, and I'd go to the seminary on Monday mornings from home. I didn't live at 18 miles away, and one morning I got up with a minister on there, and he didn't look too classic, but he had something that I got interested in. He told me he used to be a Baptist, and when he said that, I said, "You mean you used to be one and not now?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, what are you now?" He said, "I'm holiness." And then I got him talking to me, and he told me all about how I received the Spirit of God and the witness of the Spirit. And I got studying the Bible and got reading. And the more I would read, the more interested I became in what he said. So finally he invited me to go to his little church he had and to preach for them. And I did. I went around and I preached the sermon. But right in the middle of it, I had a picture with me, and I let the picture down, a picture of the crucified Christ. I'd painted that on canvas. And when I laid it down, his members began to shout and pray, and some of them crying, and I wondered what I'd done wrong.
Well, had you used that picture in other
Yes,
sermons?
I'd used that picture around in other churches, and everybody seemed to, some of them would cry, and some would like it, but nobody shouted and made any noise like this. So I had to decide right straight what those people had, and he had already told me his experience, so I went praying and seeking for mine. So one Sunday night after I'd been in the services, I was preached in a Baptist church in what they call West Kinston. And some of the old people came up and crying, took hold of my hand and told me, "Son," said, "we haven't heard any kind of preaching like this since we were young." And they wanted something, and I did too. So I went home. And
you mean you were pastoring this congregation, and they were satisfied with
well,
it?
that wasn't the church I was pastoring. I was pastoring the one over in East Kinston. This was in West Kinston. It was a call I had to come over and preach for them.
How did you feel as a pastor, a leader of people supposedly spiritually, and yet you yourself felt like you were lacking something? How did that feel?
I felt like I'd quit everything I knew wrong, but I didn't have something that I needed. And that's when I got up with this preacher, and he told me what it was I needed.
Well, tell me how you felt when you would give your sermons. I mean, would you, after the sermon was over, would you feel like you had done anything, or?
I'll tell you the truth. I'd go sit down and look at those stained glasses and sit there in a big, nice chair and look around. I'd give the whole world if I could even thoroughly believe there was a God. I was afraid there was one. I didn't want to miss him, but I really didn't know there was a God. I just had to, somebody said, take it by faith.
So you were really preaching yourself under conviction,
I was preaching to myself more than I was anyone else in there. And I finally preached myself under conviction. So that Sunday night after I'd preached in this little church in West Kinston, I went home, went praying. And I couldn't go to sleep. I kept praying and crying and praying. And I told God that I was going to find something if I had to go out in the woodland somewhere. You see, I was staying in the clerk of the Baptist church's home. And I didn't want to get noisy there. I didn't know I'd get noisy like those people were or not, but I was willing for it. So about midnight, I felt the presence of God, the first time in my life. I'd never felt it before. And it just seemed to cover me. Well, it brought a little fright to me. So I said, well, if I feel this again, I'm going to get up. And by that time, it came on, and before I could get up, it came the third time. And I hit the floor praising God and glorifying the Lord. And next thing I knew, I was speaking in a heavenly language that I never heard, I never spoke before. And I went down the hall of that house, and all the way down, and someone was telling me, said, they're going to tell you to leave this home. But I went right on to the treasurer of the church's home. And he had
to his room, you mean?
Yeah, to his room, and he had asked us not to call on him to pray in service. He didn't do any praying, but he did do the paying for the church. So when I got to his door, he fell off the bed on his knees and beat both fists on the side of the bed and cried out to God to have mercy on him. And it wasn't long after that before his wife and daughter, which were there hearing all this, they both received this baptism of the Spirit, spoke in other tongues. And he started to give up his business and to go into it himself. But later on he backed down. He had too much business to get out of his way. So he went on and lived it out and died later on. He never did get this experience as far as I know. I never heard of it.
Well, how did your congregation or your deacons or how did the church respond?
Oh, I was asked to resign. And I went and got a job and worked for 2 years. And
simply because you had this experience?
Yeah.
You didn't have any other charges against you?
No. In fact, I had better charges. They said I was one of the best men that ever been there in the church, but they didn't endorse this.
Well, tell me a conversation, for instance. Tell me a conversation that you had with one of the officials or one of the church members.
Well, one of the deacons came to me and asked me to come for a trial. They wanted to have a trial. I told them no, they weren't interested in any trial. They just let it go on like it was. They'd already called another student to come take my place from the college and go ahead with it. In fact, I said something. I guess I might not said if it was do over again. I told him I might backslide and want to come back. So go ahead and cancel me and excommunicate me like he said he was going to do.
All right, now let's go back to that night that you received the baptism of the Holy Ghost. What was going through your mind as you were lying there on the bed? Were you praying?
I was praying, and I was saying and praying too. I was saying I'm going to get up in the morning. I'm going down here in this Adkin. There was a woodland down there, and I'm going to stay down there until God does something to me, and I can say I know God, just like those people did around that little holiness church where I went to visit and preach for them.
Is that all you were just making up your mind?
Well, I had one more thing. I had a difference between me and another man, but I hadn't never come up before. It came up before me. He said I owed him $20, and I said, no, I just owe you $18. And he was a wholesale man, and he wouldn't take the $18, and I wouldn't give him the $20. But that time I cried out, God, I'll give him the $20. And when I did that, it's the last thing I remember, for the Spirit fell on me.
My. You know, I remember a conversation that you said you had with a very old deacon, I think he was. Wasn't it the man who refused to believe in your experience, or said that it was only for the 12 disciples?
Oh, yes.
Do you remember that conversation?
Yes, it was an old deacon. He was about 80 years old, and he told me, he said, the clerk of the church had already opened his business up and was telling the people that came in what happened to me at his home that night. And
you were at the clerk's home?
Yeah. And when I got down the store, the deacon was there, and he told me, he said, that's only for the 12. Only 12. I said, well, I feel sad. He said, well, about what? I said, about Peter. He said, what about Peter? I said, well, he finally backslid like Judas did, because I've taken somebody else's place. I've taken their place.
If it's just for the 12, you're one of them.
I knew I was one of them. And he kept on telling me you weren't, the holiness was wrong. And after a while, the ex-pastor came, and he told me, I'm afraid I didn't know what I was getting into. I said, well, what am I getting into? He started telling me about the bad things about holiness, that people had done this, and men had run off with women, and I don't know what else he did say. I looked at him, I said, well, did you ever know of a good man getting into it? He said, yes, he had a cousin, mighty good feller, got tangled up into it. I said, well, what happened to him? Well, he said, nothing special. I said, that's me. Just so a good man get it, I'll be satisfied, no matter who else gets it.
All right, now you said, I think you said a few minutes ago, for 2 years after this, you just had to get a job and work as you could.
I worked for 2 years after I was excommunicated, and preached every night I could find a place, a home to go and have prayer meetings. And at the end of the 2 years, I got a chance to go with a religious organization in Pentecost, and I preached for them 6 years. And then at the end of the 6 years...
Well, did you have a successful ministry?
Oh, yes, I surely did. I was pastoring 5 churches at one time. Had one through the week and one each Sunday in the month. That was when I used to have it preaching about once or twice a month. That was in 1925 when I started. That's been 55 years ago now.
Were your congregation satisfied with your ministry, or how many? Did you have a lot of problems as you went along?
Well, there wasn't much going on then, in like there is today. The money was down. You had to work and preach some too. I did both. It was quite a fall down when I only preached 2 Sundays a week in the Baptist church, and then had to go out and go to work and start preaching Pentecost. And you're lucky if you got your expenses on your trips going and coming. But it finally led on up until I got promoted in that, and I was making more in that than I was when I was with the Baptists. I had a better thing of parsonage and homes and 5 churches, like I said. I was doing just wonderful there, but later on, God showed me something else. He showed me some more works that went with it, and when I added the works on with that, why,